You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your clear host, Abraham.
And I'm your auditing host, Shane.
We're a psychology podcast. We talk about the things that people do and why they do them. And sometimes we talk about animals. We talk about all kinds of stuff. It's really great.
It really is. I mean, I feel like this podcast and being on the show has scratched so many itches of curiosity for me. I'm like, what is this?
Right?
Like, I feel like Forky from Toy Story 4. It's like,
oh yeah,
what is this? And then that's what the whole premise of the show is about.
I love that we get to learn so much and all the things that we do. And we have been doing this for some time. Do you know, in fact, why today's episode is so special?
I don't know. Why is today's episode so special?
Well, for one, because it's about Scientology, and you did a lot of research to prepare and an awesome discussion about this that I'm really looking forward to. But for two, it's because this just happens to fall on the exact date of our 6-year anniversary of doing this show. So this episode comes out on May 17th, and on May 17th, 2017 was the very first episode of Why We Do What We Do. And 6 years later, here we are, the linear path to Scientology.
Yeah, that's what I mean. This was the expected outcome, is that we started with psychology, ended with taking Tom Cruise down.
Yeah. And if you just look back, it all makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the synchronicities are there.
Yeah. And as I said, it is May 17th. And although it is now unofficially Why We Do What We Do Day, there are some other more official days that we could celebrate too.
Yes, it is International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, which I am a strong advocate for, like that.
Yeah, huge supporter. Hooray. Also against those phobias is what I'm saying.
Yes. For the day that supports being against those phobias. Yes, I appreciate you clarifying that.
We want to make sure that we go clear in our discussion here. It's also National Cherry Cobbler Day.
Like a good cobbler. It's also National Mushroom Hunting Day.
Even bigger.
Yeah, bigger, but whatever mushroom you prefer.
My favorites are, I like hedgehog mushrooms a lot. Big fan of morels. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know that I have a mushroom preference, but I do just enjoy a good mushroom.
Yeah, that's fair. Wood ear mushrooms are really good. I recommend those.
Okay. Yeah. Early
All
recommendation.
Right.
I like that.
Although I will say, just as a quick side, for people, it is National Mushroom Hunting Day. You want to go do that. That's great. Be very, very careful. There are lots of poisonous mushrooms that look like not poisonous mushrooms. So if you're going to do this, or maybe you're an experienced person, in which case, great, have fun. But otherwise, do it with an experienced person. Do not eat mushrooms that you find growing out of the ground.
Yes, do not.
It is National Pack Rat Day, which sounds like my nightmare, but it is actually more the day is in celebration of getting rid of the knick-knacky things that you've collected that you know that you don't want or need. And so in that case, I am in support.
Yeah, I like that. It's also National Walnut Day, which is a really great substitute for like different proteins in vegan meals. So,
man, there's a lot of good food on today. We've got a cherry cobbler with mushroom and walnut. All sounds really good to me, personally.
It's a really great day to celebrate. Maybe it's just telling us that we need to celebrate with desserts.
Maybe. That is a good way to interpret that. And then, of course, as I said, it is happy birthday, Why We Do What We Do. Turn 6. Our podcast is going to first grade. Hooray.
Yay.
So all the things. But yeah, let's get into our discussion for today.
Yes. So as we were going into this and as I did some research, I wanted to ask the question, what does the American Rocketry Program, the movie Grease, the band At the Drive-In, and Starship Troopers have in common? Well, you will find that the answer is Scientology. So I don't know why I wanted to do this, but it was one of those ones where I was like, this is the thing that's like, I feel like it's ever present. And as we kind of got into it, we're like, this makes sense. This tracks with the show. So your first question is, we'll get into some background and some history, but we have to ask the question of what is Scientology? And that in itself is nearly impossible to unpack.
Before we dive too much into exactly getting into this, I want to make sure that we are really clear that we're not out in this discussion to attack the beliefs of like the religious aspect of the beliefs about Scientology or any religion, really. And I think the way that I would equate this discussion and what we're going to have today, because we are definitely going to take a skeptical, scientific, psychological lens to this, and we would do that with any religion, right? We would, I think, look at it from that perspective and like, we're not ever saying don't believe in God or don't believe in aliens or don't believe in whatever. You certainly, of course, like we can't do that. You have the right to believe in whatever you want. just like if we were looking at something like, let's take, for example, the Catholic Church that has had priests that have molested children, like that's something that we would criticize. And that doesn't mean that anything about your faith is wrong. That means that something has happened inside of the organization that sanctioned behavior that we're not okay with, that people are understandably and rightfully upset about. And that is sort of similar to what we're talking about in this discussion, where you can believe whatever you want to believe about Scientology, that's fine. But there are things that we need to address in here that require a critical lens, a critical talk through, since I've used the word lens too many times.
Yeah, the way to boil that down is like, you are allowed to believe what you believe as long as it's not harming anybody. And what we're finding is that in larger organized systems, there's quite a bit of harm. And you'll see as we get into it where this harm is occurring and why it's worth kind of discussing this thing, because it is a set of behaviors that people engage in. So your personal beliefs are your personal beliefs. When they become harmful to other people, that's when it becomes an issue. So
yeah.
All right. So at the time of this writing, on the surface, when we talk about Scientology, it appears that Scientology is considered a modern religion, where others argue that it's a cult, an alleged cult, I will say. Others will state that Scientology is quote, a multifaceted transnational corporation, only one element of which is religious. And that quote comes from Stephen A. Kent, who's a professor of sociology at the University of Alberta. He specializes in new religious movements and has conducted studies on groups like Scientology, but also the Children of God, which is very clearly a cult.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There are definitely real cults that have existed and do exist. So anyway, point being, in talking about Scientology, it's one of those things where the name kind of catches you off guard. And I think on purpose, I think the intention was you take something like science that has done a lot to try and instill a reputation of being a trustworthy endeavor that produces meaningful outcomes, and that people can rely on for philosophical investigations, as well as actual clinical like outcomes and productive results and that sort of thing. And that term then got sort of co-opted to Scientology, which has nothing to do with science at all. It is not even remotely in the same realm. And so don't let that confuse you. It was just taking something that was familiar and basically repackaging it so that it would be appealing. You could simply call it Z News Tribe of e-meter reading enthusiasts, and that would be a perfectly good name for it. That would be more accurate probably. But anyway, Scientology was created in the 1940s, and as many people will have heard, this is based on the writings of one L. Ron Hubbard. And if that name sounds familiar, you may be familiar with the box office smash hit. Box office bomb that was Battlefield Earth, starring John Travolta. And this was Hubbard's work. He wrote that.
So there's your Grease reference. That's how that's tied in. But John Travolta is a pretty prominent figure in the Scientology church. Now, in 1949, the first official work on Dianetics was published, titled Terra Incognita, the Mind. Now, Dianetics is like another phrase for kind of like the workings of Scientology. So you're going to hear the term Dianetics used sometimes interchangeably with like Scientology, but really it's kind of like the belief system, the kind of the processes that occur within the Scientology realm.
Yeah, as you can see, then this is, as far as religions go, very new. Like 1940s, 1949 was Dianetics. A year later, in 1950, Hubbard published Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health. And things moved very quickly from there, with the Hubbard Association of Scientologists International being created in just 2 years later, again in 1952, and the creation of the E-meter, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then eventually the Church of Scientology becomes incorporated and receives the universally recognized religious stamp of approval, the tax-exempt status, which it achieved in 1954.
Yeah, so from 1950 to 1954, this went from being kind of a published work to an organized religion in the United States.
Yeah.
The church also would go on to form other organizations like Narconon, which is like a Narcotics Anonymous type of program, the Sea Organization, the Freedom Magazine, Criminon, which is like a criminal anonymous type of like work group, like therapy group, as well as the Personal Spiritual Freedoms Foundation. What you're going to find and why Scientology gets so complicated is it has like a bunch of organizations that are Scientology like backed a little bit, like Alcoholics Anonymous, like AA, is a religious group that backs it. It's a religious process.
Yeah.
They've kind of taken the template from other organized religions and kind of made this work for them.
I really like the name Freedom Magazine. It does make me think of something completely different than Scientology, though.
It does, right?
All right. So Hubbard, he's still around at the time. He'd been the person in charge of the church for pretty much since its inception and for some time. And he passed away a few decades later in 1986. So Shane and I are both now in the world.
Yes.
But just entered the world as L. Ron Hubbard is leaving it. Coincidence? And David Miscavige. David Miscavige. Thank you for your help with that. That seems a lot more like how I would say that. But although you can imagine, those of you who are not looking at the text in front of you, because this is an audio medium, in fact, you can imagine how it might be spelled then. Anyway, so David Miscavige is named the head of the church, and this ushers in a new era of Scientology practices. And I would imagine this is where, I mean, obviously it had been building momentum up to this point, but I think it probably kicks into high gear right about now.
Yeah, it kicks into high gear. It gets a little bit more violent than, like, allegedly. Okay, and I'm going to say allegedly because the Church of Scientology is highly litigious, so just be mindful of that. But there are many anecdotal stories of David Miscavige, like, literally getting into arguments with people and diving across boardroom tables and cross body blocking people in meetings and just beating them up, which is, like, weird because he's, like, kind of like he's got, like, a Wolverine figure, like, he's kind of short and, like, just, like, solid muscle. Like, he's one of those guys.
Cool.
Yeah, it's just there's a lot going on there. So throughout this time, and kind of up until current day, we're not going to give, like, too much of a history on this, but the organization has been the center of multiple controversies, including blackmail and coercion, as well as violence towards members who have spoken out or attempted to leave the organization. There are lots of kind of very public celebrities who have done documentaries against the church and have spoken out against the church, and there have been threats of harm and stuff like that. Along with that, multiple lawsuits have been filed either against the Church of Scientology or by the church for various reasons, including gaining tax exemption status and threats that went along with that, silencing former members, addressing tax issues, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's a real mess to try to figure out kind of the history of it. And that's why I think it's less important to kind of talk about that part and more about, like, what their core beliefs are and how that impacts people around them.
Do we need to say that they were alleged controversies and alleged silencing and alleged tax issues or something?
Allegedly, we should.
Great.
The thing is like, there are very public cases that have come out. Yeah. And so, like, that, all that stuff is there, but it's a really complex thing. And again, they're highly litigious, but what we're trying to report on is just kind of what we're able to find on the internet based on information that they have provided, let alone other organizations. So this is a synthesis of all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's probably not inaccurate at all to say that, like, there have been a lot of lawsuits that have both come from and been done by Scientology or been applied to and have come from, and that doesn't, I think, require any caveats. Although I will say, just as a quick side note, when I hear the word alleged anymore, it's like people use it in such a way that what I hear is this definitely happened, but it's not a matter of public record, so we can't say that it definitely happened, but it definitely happened.
And that's kind of what this is. So, like, now knowing a little bit of the history, I think before we get into, like, some of the basic beliefs, because this is going to take a little bit of, like, suspending disbelief as we get into it, we're going to listen to some alleged ads.
All right, now that you have your e-meter in hand from that ad, or maybe it's en route, obviously, you have to order it, so it's being shipped. But anyway, one of the things we have not talked at all about is, what do Scientologists believe? What is this religion about? And although, again, we're not criticizing people's beliefs, they can believe what they want, we do feel like it's important to unpack a little bit of what is happening inside of this religion in our discussion about what we're kind of building up to, I think, is being one of the central reasons that we wanted to talk about this in the first place.
Right. So according to the Scientology Newsroom, which was one of their information sites, their primary belief is that humanity is generally good and that, quote, spiritual salvation depends upon themselves, end quote, as well as relationships and attainment of brotherhood within the universe. Its primary concern is the full rehabilitation of the spiritual self, which includes capabilities, awareness, and certainty of their own immortality. Now, you had me until immortality. But I mean, ultimately, it doesn't sound that bad. And basically what this is saying is, like, it sounds like a very spiritual thing. And in case you didn't pick it up, the idea is that humans are immortal and that our experiences occur across multiple lifetimes.
I feel like that's a slight contradiction in terms, but that's okay. Let's continue to unpack this a little bit more, right? Another important discussion point inside of this is talking about the reactive mind and the analytical mind. That's sort of a way that Scientology breaks down their understanding of humans and human behavior. And the reactive mind is the idea that our mind absorbs all of our pain and trauma. And alternatively, our analytical mind is responsible for consciousness and reason. So our reactive mind stores distress and withholds information, and the analytical mind doesn't have access to that distress information. It is trying to essentially make sense of the world and pursue it in a logically coherent way. This is like not super dissimilar at all from Freud's breakdown of the subconscious with the id, ego, and superego, except his had 3 parts and this has 2.
I think what you're going to find here, and what you'll see already, is that we've already got reincarnation built into this across multiple lifetimes.
Yeah.
The human soul is immortal, lives across multiple lifetimes, gains experiences, capabilities, and all that. And also the human psyche is split into these 2 things, the reactive mind and the analytic mind, where the analytic mind is struggling, and your challenges and your life struggles because you have all this trauma that's like basically blocking you up. That is going to come up later.
Right.
Now, another key belief is that humans are full of endless capabilities and hidden abilities that have not been realized. Their potential is assessed and evaluated through a process called auditing. And I actually really like this idea that human beings have like endless capabilities, which I would make an argument kind of falls in line with behavior science a little bit, that like given the right environment and given the right context, human beings are capable of quite a bit. So you're seeing kind of an amalgamation of all these belief systems coming together to form this thing.
Yeah, there's a level of appealing optimism inside of this that like you come in and they're basically like, look, you have this mental constipation that's clogging you up, and all we need to do is get you a little prune juice, some laxatives, mind laxatives, if you will.
Yeah, spiritual enema.
Yeah, it's gonna flush all that out of here, and then you have anything that you want to do or be, you can do or be. And I think, again, the optimism is there. And I think that they're not wrong that like a lot of times people, and I think we've addressed this before on the show, but I think people get really sort of locked inside of their own expectations for themselves. And then they have a hard time seeing past that to what they then could potentially have their behavior be. So I think that our science, that is not Scientology, is also pretty optimistic, as you said, because we also see a lot of room for improvement in people, and we often are able to see those results realized and achieved. And so I think that we have good reason to believe that that's the case. This is a little more nebulous. It's not anchored to any specific behavioral measures or outputs. It's more like you get the membership card that says that so maybe it's not that nebulous. I mean, you get the card that says you're there, but
yeah.
You get the new set of keys to the new doors that you couldn't get to before.
Admittedly, I didn't think that I would find any common ground with like any of this. And like when they were like, yeah, humans could do things. I'm like, yeah, you're right. They could. Like I had a moment where I was like, oh, and I was like, oh no, that's how they get you.
That's right. In most good lies, there is always a nugget of truth. And a lot of things we want to just be black and white, that we disagree with things. So we hate them universally, unilaterally, and without exception. And I think the reality is that everything is more nuanced than that.
Sure.
There are certain things that people that I fundamentally disagree with, that they get right.
Right.
That they'll occasionally, I'm like, yeah, I completely agree with where they're at on this. Like that happens sometimes. And I think I can appreciate the nuance of that. And so even though I don't think that I agree with a lot of the process here, as you said, I can get on board with this part of it. So we were talking about auditing before I sidetracked us really hard. During the audit process, the auditor, not the auditee, but the auditor is an individual trained to administer their assessment. They meet with the person. They get out their little e-meter. They plug it up to you and stick it in all the holes, wrap things around you, all that sort of thing. They don't stick anything in holes, I don't think.
Yeah, you're basically holding like 2 soda can size like metal things.
Yes.
While you talk. That's all it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to give you a second here to elaborate more on these because anyway, so they give you this e-meter thing, they get you all hooked up, and what they want to do is they're going to they tell you they're gathering readings about you as a person, and they're basically asking you to confess things. Mm-hmm. Mostly concerns, thoughts, feelings, but kind of unload. Just share things with them. This is like, hey, I'm your new best friend. You can tell me all your secrets for the right price. I'll keep those locked up and no one else will hear them. And that information is recorded and stored indefinitely. And that's part of the pre-clear process. So you're going toward clear, but to get there, you first have to be pre-clear, like the TSA.
Right, exactly. So essentially, you're going into an audit being pre-clear, meaning that you have all this blockage. And then what you're trying to do is they're trying to gather information so they can figure out how to get you to clear. And we'll talk about how you get there according to their religion. But to get to clear, meaning that you don't have any blockages, which means that you can, engage as a human at your highest potential, your highest capability.
Okay.
So that's kind of a core value that you'll find within this.
So there's the whole thing about going clear as like a thing that is almost synonymous in a way with the process of being a member in Scientology.
Yeah,
or becoming
exactly.
a member. Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, I need to know more about these e-meters, Shane.
Oh, yes. Okay. So an e-meter, the e-meter they use to audit, it's very likely if you've ever seen for those of you who might be like out and about in different like major cities where Scientology place like does exist, like maybe Clearwater, Florida, but you might see like a booth where some members of the Scientology church will be hanging out and they'll have an e-meter that they can like audit you right then and there. Now, these e-meters or electropsychometers are used as an assessment process for those interested in joining the church. And you'll see them have signs sometimes that'll say like free test, free personality test. That's if you see a Scientology church, they're getting ready to audit you. What they are designed to do is they're used to measure what's called electrodermal activity or EDA. And the tool is likened to polygraphs, like something like that, where they essentially do nothing based on what they originally proposed to do. Like, so they don't do the thing that they say they do. They just measure electrical output, kind of.
Right. Kind of.
Yeah, kind of. And the FDA actually labeled these as illegal medical devices.
And make sure we're saying this, not a legal medical device, but an illegal medical device. Important distinction.
An illegal. Yes. And so any device that you see is going to have a disclaimer that states that it is a purely religious artifact.
Very important. Yes. It looks like a shitty video game system with a console and two handles, as you said, sort of small soda can sized handles that are attached to wires. And that's supposedly how they gather readings. And you may have taken a free stress test as another way it's described.
Yeah.
I've definitely heard the personality test thing, but the auditor might describe it as a free stress test. And if you see them on the street, that's the thing that they're doing. Now, I found this description from someone named Chris Schaffsmeister, who seemed like this is a biophysics person. And what he said is, quote, an e-meter is a Wheatstone bridge, an electronic circuit that measures electrical resistance relative to a standard resistance. And then he goes on to describe that it detects something that they call engrams. And in his description, I read as carefully as I could. There's a lot of science and math that's a little above my head because I'm not a biophysics person. But essentially, if you break down the physics and the biology of how something like this is supposed to work, his sort of final conclusion is that it is physically impossible for something like this to do what it says it's doing by the very nature of the fact that it's measuring something that is essentially intended to be way too small to be detected and arranged in a way too complex of a pattern for a machine of that nature to detect it. Also, he says our bodies are not wires and do not conduct electrical activity as a wire does. And so hooking someone up to a device of this nature and expecting it to read their electrical activity as if they were a potato that you plug two wires in does not work.
Right. So the device itself is already kind of scientifically proven not to work. Now, the other side of this that I think is really important to remember, and this is something that gets used later, is that when they're auditing, they're gathering information and they're storing that information indefinitely. This is the equivalent of going into a confessional and the priest writing down everything that you're saying in that confessional booth and then putting it in a file for later.
Right. Yes.
Right. So everybody has that picture. And listeners, I imagine that you're probably picking up where that might be a problem. Because I've already mentioned the term blackmail. But historically, there have been some reports of like that information being used to hold people hostage within the church, allegedly.
Yeah.
So if the goal is to get clear, we have to ask the question, what is clear and what does it look like? What is that state of clear? And are you clear? And the state of clear is, I'm so glad you asked, Abraham, is the status that follows specifically anybody in the Scientology realm. Anybody in the Scientology church can achieve clear after completing certain clearing activities, which is kind of nice. Objective tasks. I like that.
Yeah. Laxative, clear.
Laxative, clear. That's it. Nice and easy. Now, the idea is that your trauma and your emotional stress, which are held by the reactive mind, are preventing or blocking you from achieving your full potential. And as such, you engage in activities to clear the blockage, which leads you to accessing your full potential. So again, very optimistic, very hopeful. But as you continue to remove these blocks, you can achieve closer to a state of clear. I like that.
Eventually become so clear that you are invisible to the naked eye.
You're like Visine out here.
Now, going clear is actually not just a one and done activity. After you've reached clear status, you begin receiving a spiritual status above clear. So you can become, like I said, you go from invisible to like metaphysical, I think.
Yes.
But anyway, you go so clear that you can reach operating thetan or OT, not to be confused with Netflix's the OA, which is a different letter altogether.
Very different. Very different.
Yeah, but operating thetan or OT. There are 8 levels fully endorsed by the church, but the church has also discussed the possibility of as many as 15 stages of this. Okay. And so, as you might guess, you'll need to pay an additional fee to take the courses to achieve each level of thetanhood.
Yeah, so you are OT level 1, OT level 2, and we'll talk about what the different levels are because you can actually see what the course rundowns are, which is kind of interesting. You can't see what's in the course, but you can see kind of the series.
Sure.
Now, the additional levels that were discovered after L. Ron Hubbard died have never been released, and so the thought is that it might just be a way to kind of keep people on the hook, but
sure,
we'll leave that. Now, strap in. When you reach OT 3, you begin to experience your full self and get closer to Xenu, a figure within Scientology's advanced technology component of the belief. So part of Scientology is that they believe that this advanced technology exists, and that part of it was brought to the planet Earth by Xenu. Now, Xenu is, in the lore, is the extraterrestrial ruler of the Galactic Confederacy. The story goes that he brought billions of his own people, the T-Giac, to Earth 75 million years ago and killed them with hydrogen bombs. The spirits of these aliens attach themselves to humans and are a part of the reason we experience spiritual harm or blockages or why we're pre-clear. Why is this important for the church? Well, you cannot achieve OT3 without getting past, quote, the wall of fire, which is part of the experience of the Thetans, which were the alien spirits, and a course to learn how to break through the wall of fire can cost nearly $9,000 to achieve.
Just out of curiosity, do you happen to know if the cost of these levels increases with inflation?
I imagine they probably do.
I would think so. I do think they're probably subject to the whims of the market.
Yeah.
Anyway, here's a quick rundown of the known, just as a quick reminder, operating thetan or thetan levels or OT. So you have OT1. This is the first step toward becoming clear. This is a small sum of $2,750. Just pull it out of your savings. You're good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you invest that again, plus some, you can, for a $5,225 fee. At the time of this recording, who knows what the pressures of inflation will do to this, but that will bring you to OT2. At OT3, as we said, this is crossing the wall of fire into Xenu territory, which is a sentence I never thought I would say.
Uh-huh.
And that is for a small fee of $8,910. And so now my quick back of the envelope calculations put us well over $16,000 or the cost of one Honda Fit, approximately, of investment to reach those levels of clarity.
Yeah. And going forward, you've got OT4, which is the drug rundown course. The cost is unknown. I couldn't find a listing of that. OT5 is audited new era Dianetics for OTs. OT6 is solo NOTS auditing courses. OT7 is solo NOTS as well. And then OT8, level 8, the final official endorsed class is called Truth Revealed. I mean, it sounds like, hey, like you're getting into a secret club, but you just got to pay a lot of money to get there, right?
I got to say, honestly, you look at these and you're like, well, I could swing that amount of money. I want to know what they have to say up at, OT2, OT3. And I feel like there's a certain level of sort of I can imagine someone who's got the cash to burn looks at this and is like, I could have elite membership in this club.
Sure.
Because I can afford to ascend these levels so rapidly. And I could see a certain level of appeal of that. So maybe someone who's very insecure, doesn't have a lot of direction in life and has a ton of cash to burn, maybe just recently came out of a few big movies, is thinking I could be an action star someday. Maybe I need to be a clear action star. Who knows?
And then you start filming Mission Impossible as a guess.
I don't know who you're talking about. Vin Rames, maybe?
Yeah.
As a quick summary, the idea here is you do not reach your full potential because your reactive mind prevents you from becoming clear or reaching that potential, right? You are pre-clear. You're a pre-clear failure. And part of the reason you're pre-clear is because Xenu, the alien overlord, killed so many of his people 75 million years ago. And you have an evil alien hitchhiker that's attached to your soul. And so to go clear. You can take these courses to gain spiritual healing with, just spend those tens of thousands of dollars probably, and then at least 8 known courses to reach your potential. Make sense? Got it?
Makes sense.
Great.
Got it. We got it. Listen, now here's the thing. You might be going, that sounds a little absurd. Like, as somebody who is an atheist, sure, that might sound absurd to me when you read it like that. But you could do the same thing about any story in the Bible. I mean, like, truly, like, when you say stuff out loud, you're like, okay, so God created humans in himself and then got real sick of their and then sent himself back down as a different person, but also himself. He could walk on water and make bread out of thin air and make fish out of thin air and make wine out of water, and then had people that he created kill himself and also his son, and then come back and then everybody is good. Like, when you say the stuff out loud, and obviously I'm saying in a satirical tone, it sounds ridiculous, but it makes sense that people could possibly buy into this, because this is truly no different than what you might hear in other religions.
I think the Scientologists would be happy to hear that. And I think that you also might be wondering to yourself, why is a psychology podcast talking about Scientology, this weird religion thing? And maybe it makes perfect sense to you, but I think we do need to get in why we talk about Scientology. But first, we need to get in some ads. Okay, we are back. We've been talking about Scientology, comparing it to a lot of the world's religions. I agree with your point that although it topographically does look different than a lot of the other religions that have relied mostly on extra metaphysical figures, this one simply relies on extraterrestrial figures.
Sure.
And so there's not really a lot of difference in those, but there's actually a more important relation between Scientology specifically and psychology that does not exist in the same way across other religions.
Right. So a main element of the Church of Scientology is that they consider themselves a scientific community. So that's a big element of this. They consider themselves a scientific community, and they have sought copyrights for their technologies, though many of their publications and technologies have been deemed either ineffective or harmful and have been rejected. So this is a really important thing. You're not going to see a lot of priests writing in scientific journals to try to get their beliefs within that system published in scientific literature. But Scientology kind of stands out differently because they have actively tried to do that.
That is a thing. That is a thing to think about.
It gets worse. It gets worse. Just as you prepare yourself, it's a lot to kind of absorb.
Yeah. So one of the reasons we wanted to discuss this is because Scientology, I'm not even sure allegedly is the right word here. This is pretty clear. There is a blatant disregard for psychology and psychiatry. Now, they say that they're science-based, so that seems surprising. But this is a part of where the big pharma conversation started, was Scientology. So do you know why they began to dislike psychology and psychiatry? Well, maybe you do. Let's get into it anyway. L. Ron Hubbard was rejected by psychiatry and the psychology community. The church has gone on to say that the fields of psychology and psychiatry ignore the spiritual dimension and Hubbard's ideas of the mind, which is the equivalent of saying your brain is like a blocked artery.
Yeah.
And so they have taken this very staunch position on these fields. Just as a quick side note, I think that we as people, practitioners inside of psychology, version of it, are highly critical of our own field because we feel like it's important to move forward. The way to move forward is to be critical of our flaws and to point them out and correct them when they exist.
Sure.
And so we're all for criticizing fields that don't do well. Rejecting them wholesale because they turned you down at their luncheon is a different matter altogether.
Right. So what you're going to find is Scientology specifically started as a personal revenge story almost. And this is why it's important to understand learning histories and motivations. So Hubbard himself believed psychiatry and psychology to be good initially. He received treatment during World War II for extended periods of moroseness and suicidal inclinations, that's part of his history. He was unable to afford it and began studying psychiatry informally to develop his own theories. People do this all the time.
Yeah.
Right? They're I did my own, this is the equivalent of I did my own research. Okay.
Which is to say I invented my own research.
That's essentially what happened, right? So his ideas were rejected due to his overall arrogance about the science and neglect of known science or scientific inquiry about the processes, the brain process in psychology. So he basically came in and said, here's what I think. And everybody that was in the field was we already know more about this than what you just said. So that doesn't make any sense. We are already beyond this question
Yeah.
that you're asking. And you would know that if you hadn't done your own research. So immediately after this, after he was kind of like rejected and his ideas were rejected, he wrote Dianetics, like immediately after. His wife, Sarah, sought institutionalization as a result of growing concerns. Like she specifically tried to get him hospitalized because of his own mental health concerns.
Right.
And specifically about his specific violence and irrationality around a lot of the stuff. So he was pretty violent and had a lot of challenges. And he actually kidnapped his wife and daughter as a result of this kind of breakdown. And soon after, he came out to say that psychiatry was evil. So it sounds like he wasn't accessing these services in a really powerful way or a meaningful way, and had some kind of maybe undiagnosed or concerning presenting problems and never got them adequately treated. So this was like almost like a coping mechanism for him.
I would guess that the revisionist history version of this that Scientology might want you to believe is that he became disillusioned with psychiatry because they were not open to new ideas, and so he left the field. And I think that's just not what it really looks like is what happened.
Sure.
And so I would be disinclined to trust the opinion of the person who has stake, who has like a reason to, both, I guess at this point, financial reason to have their position seem like the right one. Anyway, they went so far as to form the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, which runs the Anti-Psychiatry Museum, which is called Psychiatry and Industry of Death. Mm-hmm. They also wrote a book called Believe What You Like, which saw them try to spy on British institutions related to mental health. And as an example of this, the de facto figurehead of Scientology is kind of Tom Cruise. I think it's largely because of his continued and maintained popularity and fame in movies and that sort of thing, and the fact that it's just very well known that he's a Scientologist. He has been very vocal about his dislike of psychiatry in particular. And a direct quote from the all teeth, no soul actor includes, quote, "I think psychiatry should be outlawed," and, quote, "There's no such thing as a chemical imbalance," end quote. And has criticized others for taking medications regularly. And I think that is a position, personal or otherwise, that is very harmful to people who are suffering with mental health problems.
Absolutely. He was in a pretty public feud with Brooke Shields, of all people, after Brooke Shields had talked about using medication to help manage her postpartum depression, which is a very real thing.
Sure. Yeah.
She was public about that. She was very vulnerable about it. And Tom Cruise was like, yeah, that's not real, like as he does. And so Brooke Shields actually had a really great quote on this. She said, quote, "Tom Cruise should stick to saving the world from aliens and let women who are experiencing postpartum depression decide what treatment options are best for them," end quote, which is reasonable, rational, measured, and absolutely, like, I advocate for that. Like, whatever you think works best for you, go do it, but don't listen to Tom Cruise about it.
Fair enough. Anyway, that is essentially why we think that there's a pretty clear link between what we discuss and Scientology is this sort of war against psychology, about which, as I said, we're in favor of criticism. I think it's good. This sort of blanketed approach of like, well, I have my own ideas about psychology, and I'm not going to do the work or research or get the degree or have an understanding of what that is. I'm just going to sort of, without knowing what's going on in psychology and psychiatry, going to make up my own ideas. And if you don't like them, then it's because you're evil.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the sort of what happened. And I mean, that's just a nonsense position to take. Like,
sure.
And I think, as I was saying earlier, if demonizing or essentially saying that people who are suffering with these things, it's not real, like what they believe isn't, like, it's just a belief that they have. It's just those, thetans or whatever. Engrams.
It's the stuff attached to your soul. It's the blocked brain.
This is extremely harmful. There are people out here who are legitimately battling with the kind of mental health problems that could result in things like suicide or going out and hurting other people. And like, to just say their problems aren't real, I think it makes it a significantly more dangerous, elevated situation. I think at the very least, we treat at face value what someone is reporting is happening so that we can figure out what's going on and do our best to support them. And that telling people that whatever they're experiencing is invalid right out the gate is not a smart place to be, practically or philosophically or clinically.
I think that's honestly where my biggest thing comes from with this, as far as like this particular belief system. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of belief systems that exist out there that include a lot of things that I may not agree with, but that do exist. I mean, but the thing is when it comes down to this particular thing, having mental health concerns in my family, working with a lot of people that have mental health diagnoses that really struggle with those, and their quality of life is diminished because of those, because they're not getting adequate treatment, or they're not getting enough treatment, or they're not getting the treatment that works for them. I mean, watching that happen and then having somebody like Tom Cruise come out and say, well, none of this is real, is just a slap in the face to somebody who works in the field, let alone somebody who might have a diagnosis. And I cannot imagine how hurtful that would be, watching somebody stand up on a platform and a pedestal and be on talk shows and promoting movies and going, I did my own stunts. I jumped out of an airplane and I popped popcorn on the way down. Also, mental health isn't real. And you're like, what the are you doing, dude?
Yeah.
That's my biggest bias against this, and like why it's such a concern, let alone the other stuff that we're going to talk about. But like, that's, I think, my biggest thing. Believe what you want, but at this point in time, it's becoming quite harmful, the messaging around this.
Now, you might be hearing what we've been saying, the criticisms we've been leveling at this, and hear this whole like moving up a level, getting deeper and deeper into the system sort of thing, and think this sounds a lot like a cult. So we need to unpack that question. Is it a cult? Does this meet that definition of a cult?
Allegedly. While this episode in particular is not about cults, a common criticism of this is that Scientology gets compared to cultish behavior. So by definition, a cult is, quote, a system of religious veneration and devotion directed towards a particular figure or object, end quote. So another way cults have been described has been a, quote, a group of people with usually atypical beliefs living in relative isolation from the world, end quote. So kind of wrapping your head around those definitions, I think it's important to kind of unpack a couple things around cults.
So those are some quick definitions. I think other things to think about when we're trying to look at what cults are and what they do is what are the common elements of when we have sort of an archetype of a cult versus other things that do cult-like things. That usually involves things like authoritarian control. You got someone who has total control over everything that everybody, the members all do. Extremist beliefs. So it's not just like, we believe that flowers are really pretty and therefore we're going to stick our grounds. It's like something that's way outside of a sort of normal range of behaviors. Isolation from society usually means you do not communicate or talk with others on the outside. That's usually a very core component of cults. And then usually, commonly, a veneration of a single individual as being like the primary figurehead, status symbol, leader, whatever it is. There is like a person who is regarded as having the highest level of status and sort of quality, if you will.
So when we start kind of going further, I think it's important to also define that there, kind of express that there's different types of cults. There are doomsday cults, which are cults that prepare for the end of the world, like the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas in the 1990s, if you're familiar with that whole situation. There are political cults. I mean, all you got to do is look at January 6th. You've got religious cults, where it generally starts with a brand new theology or a religion, or they're sex cults, which focus primarily on sex and sexual abuse, like Nexium, which is a recent kind of like a weird MLM that came up, multi-level marketing scheme that came up that turned into a sex cult, and there was like some pretty public trials where people got charged or sent to prison for it, like including some actors.
Wow. Okay. So these are actually like contemporary things that are going on, like Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, Matt Gaetz is definitely a part of
okay
one of these.
I meant to say Nexium. I don't know how that slipped out. Anyway,
it's just. It happens sometimes. Now, there are some other examples of cults that are important to note, like Heaven's Gate, People's Temple, which was Jim Jones, the Unification Church. There are many, 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 many cults out there that exist that are used as different case examples and have pulled these characteristics that we've just described.
And there are multiple motivations for why someone would join a cult, how they get recruited to cults, how cults recruit people. So it makes sense that groups like the Church of Scientology would be able to recruit folks, right? And get them to sort of into that system. Sometimes people seek shared experiences and relationships. Others are seeking spiritual meaning. Others are often tricked or manipulated into joining, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of hope, sometimes both. Whatever the reason, there are groups of people who find their way in the arms of welcoming organizations only to find out that it wasn't necessarily what they expected, or they continued to like believe and sort of maintain the facade for a really long time because they want to believe it so badly. But then that really does beg the question, based on all of this discussion of cults, is the Church of Scientology a cult?
By definition, not necessarily, but also maybe. And that's the challenge. That's the kind of the concern that goes along with this. It seems the only lacking element is that central figure, although L. Ron Hubbard might effectively serve that role as like the person that's venerated. Like, it's not quite the same as Jim Jones, like not the omnipresent kind of like the one above all, the end of all there is type of situation. Like, it's not like that. But supposedly, L. Ron Hubbard has ascended to all the extra levels that nobody else is, and he is off exploring the galaxy and the Xenoverse. So
there's some other differences too, is like they aren't really the isolationist way that many cults tend to operate. Like they do keep their secrets closely guarded, but they don't prevent members from going out and sort of being out in the community and doing things in the world.
Right. Yeah, they're actually pretty public, which is like an odd thing too.
Yeah, so like that's not really cult-like. Their beliefs, I think I would categorize as extremist, but as we said, they're not really all that different from believing that like someone read magic stones out of a hat, for example.
Or talk to a burning bush.
Or talk to a piece of shrubbery that was on fire. So like I think it actually does meet a lot closer to the definition of a religion than it does a cult. And so I think I probably wouldn't necessarily slip it into cult status, but there are things about it that are cult-like, and I can understand why they're concerning for that reason.
So the main concern really in this space is that the church engages in active processes to suppress, harass, or classify its followers and critics openly. So like what they'll do is they ask that their followers disconnect from their attachments. There are some reports of that, and are told that those people are considered suppressive persons, or SPs. And SPs are like a derogatory term in the church. You are an SP, you are bad. You should not be around. Followers also receive training on how to manage skeptics like us. So I imagine we'll probably get some emails at some point in time. So I think there is like a little bit of the isolation component there, but not necessarily. It's like kind of like get rid of the people who are SPs.
I'm an SP.
I'm an SP too. But like you could get rid of the people who are SPs, because they're going to constantly like put those blocks back in place and keep you from being clear. And so bring them on, or just keep them at arm's length is like essentially what happens.
We're negative Nellies over here.
That's it.
During the audit process, secrets are gathered and stored. As we mentioned, this is sort of treated as confessional. You're asked to give them a lot of personal information that they then get to hold on to. In a standard confessional, someone might share their inner secrets or concerns. Where it is forgiven and left in a confessional booth, in this case, every confession is documented and stored for later retrieval if needed.
Uh-huh.
And this alone can create a coercive relationship and create coercive control. So sort of the if you leave, everyone will find out type of approach. So this does then sort of look like that authoritarian control that we've seen in other cult-like things as well.
Right. And so to kind of like maybe button this particular section up, Rue in 2018 compares auditing to pastoral counseling. And if you're uninitiated, pastoral counseling is a form of psychotherapy that includes spiritual resources as well as psychological understanding for healing and growth, and is typically performed by mental health professionals that have theological training. So you'll find this kind of like in church faith-based types of settings.
Right.
And my question would be, how could this be if there's a strong aversion to psychology and psychotherapy? Answer that one, Cruz. How could auditing and pastoral counseling be the same, even though they have the same processes?
Oh. Well, we can answer that. Auditors are not trained counselors, and the audit process is an assessment. Either Rue had a gross misunderstanding of the audit process, or he's one of them. Either way, it just doesn't make very much sense to essentially say, like, we're going to do something that looks like psychology and also say psychology and psychiatry aren't real.
Right.
Or are evil.
I mean, it's a whole thing. So now that we have kind of an idea of where we're going and what's next, let's get to the point in the Scientology episode where we do talk about science. But while we prepare for that, we're going to listen to a couple ads.
Okay, we promised you science. We are here to deliver. Obviously, I think the first thing to say is that there isn't really any science behind Scientology, particularly what they deem as being sort of effective, but there are some nuanced things that are worth unpacking in terms of understanding science and how it relates to this.
Yeah, so the first thing to really understand about what's going on in the world of Scientology is this idea of coercion. And so there is an extensive body of research on the impact of coercion and what it does. And between the impact on mental health and well-being of those in coercive circumstances, the church does kind of employ these practices that impacts followers. Defectors from the church indicate that the impact the church had on their overall well-being and relationships overall, it was really difficult for them to get on and to move, like to create friends and to become, part of their communities because there was so much coercive control.
I was going to ask you real quick. I figure we may as well. I figure most people will have heard the term coercion, and most that listen to us will know what that means. But just in case, I figure we'd define it really quick.
Yeah, vocabulary. I like that. Coercion is the practice of persuading someone to do something by use of force or threats.
Right.
So essentially, when you think of the audit process, I have all this information on you. You're going to do what I say, or else the world is going to find out. And as a matter of fact, that's like one of the biggest discussions around John Travolta's involvement with the Church of Scientology. Everybody's got rumors and stuff like that, but that's actually one of the big points of contention that comes up with John Travolta time and time again. He's still only part of the church because he'll get outed as a homosexual man, and he doesn't want that.
Anyway, I guess that is what it is.
It's a whole thing, but it's exhausting.
Now, Kent and Manka in 2014 have written about the impact of Scientology on the field of psychiatry and state that misinformation practices and public statements about the field of psychiatry have ultimately harmed public trust in psychiatry and have made it so that fewer people are accessing services that they may need that would help get them the supports that would allow them to recover and find sort of strength and meaning in their relationships and in their lives, because they see that practice as being problematic. So again, there's oftentimes I think there are these people in the past who did not think about the long-term implications of picking a fight with a whole field of people who are out there trying to help others.
I think that's an important thing. Now, is Scientology the only place that the bad vibes are coming from when it comes to psychiatry? No, not even close.
Right.
But their messaging certainly isn't helping.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
Now, Ratana in 2017 goes further to cite the practices of Dianetics and claims of psychology being pseudoscientific as harmful to those with actual psychiatric concerns. So basically what they were comparing was what's going on with Scientology versus what's happening in psychology. So for instance, if things like chemical imbalances and psychiatric disorders are a myth, then the claims that Scientology makes disregards concerns related to queer patients and their unique needs. A lack of care around clinically significant disorders can produce higher rates of psychiatric symptoms, leading to harm to the self or others. So that's kind of what you were saying before, which is if I'm not getting the help I need, I am increasing risk of harm to people around me. And so the messaging around calling psychiatry and psychology pseudoscientific increases risk for those who are at risk.
Right. Lazar Kravitz, Friedrich Kadem in 2002, and I don't think it's that Kravitz, different Kravitz.
Different, yeah, not Lenny, not Leonard Kravitz.
Or Zoe, explored self-reported motivations for Jewish religious behavior and found that there were several factors: belief in divine order, ethnic identity, social activity, family activity, and upbringing. And while we cannot directly apply the same factors to Scientology, we can see how these factors would lead to involvement in a large church-type organization.
Yeah, it makes sense, I think. When you're looking for activities, social groups, an organization, whether they're religious or not, may provide for that. And it makes sense that people would join these larger groups.
Yeah.
Rousselet et al. In 2017 explored cult membership and how people end up joining and or leaving said cult. They found that there are shared characteristics among cult membership and addictive disorders. Things like persistence of engagement despite harm or damage, initial psychological relief, occupation or engagement in a membership or club, high psychiatric comorbidities, and accessibility to related activities. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they found that, addictive disorders and cult membership have a lot of parallels.
Yes. Yeah. I think that there's probably a whole episode to unpack about that at some point in the future.
Yes.
But there's someone that I think we talk about too little on this show, whose name is Israel Golddiamond, and he's not talking about either cults or Scientology specifically, but I think in generally understanding these complex things that humans do that sometimes look very confusing when we don't understand them. He said it's contingencies, plural. And in this case, what we mean by contingencies is essentially the relation between our behavior and its effect in the world and how that then later affects us and our behavior. And the behavioral contingencies, the circumstances related to joining a major organization make sense. Feeling stressed, they offer a place of relief and rest. Having a problem, they can solve it, even if that place creates a problem. Lonely, they got lots of people. You got built-in friends. Want meaning in your life? There's something you can do to save the world, save yourself, save other people. Mm-hmm. And feeling sick, they've got a solution for that very specific alien blockage problem. And so anyway, the point being that there are lots of, it's not just one thing. In fact, with everything, it's never just one thing. It is all the things all the time and how they interact with one another too. One thing could change another in terms of the circumstances of your life. And so Israel Golddiamond is someone we should invoke more often in our discussions.
Absolutely, 100%. So with all of that being said, there are some other tidbits that I thought were really important that we could talk about related to this.
Yeah. important and fun.
I think important and fun, but also will provide a little bit more context about like the high strangeness that goes along with this. So first of all, there are only about 40,000 Scientologists globally.
Wow. That is a shockingly small number.
Which is much less than I thought.
Yeah, that surprises me tremendously.
So it's mind-blowing because there are more behavior analysts in the world than Scientologists, and nobody knows what I do for a living. That is so frustrating.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, if you were to plop every Scientologist on the entire planet into one town, it would be a tiny, tiny rural town.
It'd be a small town.
Like, they'd have like a grocery store and a gas station.
And they have enough property to make it small town, too.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. And also somehow like 11 Starbucks, but
yeah,
and definitely a Walmart. Another interesting tidbit here. They own about 12 million square feet of property. That's where you're going with your small town thing.
That's where I was going. Yep.
With 26 properties that are worth approximately $400 million. Their headquarters in Clearwater, Florida. Yeah.
Of course it's Florida.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't see that coming. It's worth about $168 million. So House of Mouse and House of Going Clear.
Zeno.
Yeah, House of Xenu.
House of Xenu.
Nearby.
It didn't catch me until this moment. Like, do you think they picked Clearwater specifically because it's clear?
I do think I think that's maybe they renamed it too.
I feel like that was very explicit. Yeah, I think it was explicit.
Either they changed the name or they chose it because of the name.
Yeah, I feel like it had to have been very intentional to be there. So some believe that academics are actually afraid to study Scientology and publish on the religion due to their highly litigious nature and suppressive tactics. It appears that their public relations, like Scientology's public relations and their practices, will make those people SPs to the world, those academics that are studying. So like everybody, it's like one of those things where it's like we're publishing this episode, but like we also know that there's a risk that we're going to get an email from the Church of Scientology. It's going to be like, hey, take this down. Like, because they are so litigious and there's so many public records of them. So like academics don't even want to study them because they're like, I don't want to bother. They're afraid of it.
Yeah, we need HBO money to like hire lawyers that can help us deal with this. But
yeah.
You can also help us by joining us on Patreon.
The Why We Do What We Do Legal Defense Fund.
Yeah, exactly right. Our goal for our public hangout is 15 patrons. Our goal for like a public activity is 20 patrons. Our goal for having enough money to battle the Scientology lawyers is 2 million patrons. So,
yes.
Well, let's break all those records, guys.
Every little bit helps. Every little bit helps.
The major move that Scientologists have made is enlisting actors, major public figures that are well known and well liked, that then will go out and share their message. We already know about Tom Cruise and John Travolta, but there's also Giovanni Ribisi, Elizabeth Moss, Nancy Cartwright, Doug E. Fresh, and Isaac Hayes, who famously left South Park due to their episode on Scientology. And among those who originally joined and left also include William S. Burroughs, Beck, Cedric Bixler Zavala, who is the At the Drive-In.
The singer of At the Drive-In, yep.
Yeah, who are in that. Neil Gaiman, Katie Holmes, Charles Manson, and Leo Remini, who famously went after the church in several documentaries that were pretty powerful.
Are we going to skip over that Charles Manson was a Scientologist at some point in time?
No, that did occur. That did occur to me to maybe circle back around to. So there's that.
William S. Burroughs and Charles Manson were both like, no, this is too much. Just to kind of put that in your heads. Now, for a period of time, L. Ron Hubbard was living in a home with Jack Parsons as part of a group studying thelemic magic. Jack Parsons is partly responsible for helping establish rocketry in the United States as part of a group of scientists at Caltech called the Suicide Squad. And they were known as a Suicide Squad, and that's where the original name came from. They were known for their unorthodox and dangerous methods, which caused several explosions on campus and off campus. Jack Parsons actually died in an explosion in his own house. So, like, it was kind of like a pattern of behavior that he had, but he's responsible for creating jet engines.
Wow. And his consciousness was put into a shark, who then became a sentient soldier.
I hope so.
Yeah. There's a myth that Hubbard actually created the religion on a bet with Robert A. Heinlein, a wonderful author of Stranger in a Strange Land and Starship Troopers, our final tie-in. And while this is not confirmed, several reports indicate that Hubbard had made multiple comments about how starting a religion could be a good way to make money, allegedly.
Allegedly.
I wonder if we should just call this podcast episode Scientology, allegedly.
I think that's the name of it. I think that's the name. You got it.
Perfect. We did it.
I mean, L. Ron Hubbard had a lot of yachts, so he did make some money off of this.
Yeah, fair.
All right. So, I mean, with all this information, it's probably worth doing some take-home points. So I think my main take-home point in kind of going through all this is that it's not unfair to describe Scientology as an alleged cult. Those main key markers are there in one form or another. They might be a little bit more nuanced, but they're there. And that those that have spoken out about the harms of this particular group, they parallel harms of other cults consistently. The people are being suppressed, they're being hurt, that they are being coerced. And I think it's, like I said, it's not necessarily, I don't know that you can outright call Scientology a cult. Obviously, we're not here, but it's not unfair to liken them to a cult, I think.
Yeah, I can see that. And so I think they wouldn't like really meet the technical definition, but they do share some characteristics.
Yes.
With cults and things that cults do. And I do get that. And one of the things they have done is taken an existing problem and create a solution that only they have. It's a page right out of the sort of pseudoscience handbook, is to sort of patent and lock down these positions. Now, I will also say a lot of pseudosciences give their stuff away for free, but then they are sort of like, because their stuff doesn't work, it's sort of like, oh, well, you need this other thing to really bring it to the next level. And that's where they get people in the door. And I think that's not different here, right? There's the, like, you get your personality test.
Yeah.
And then you pay us thousands of dollars and you get to learn the truth, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we do have lots of research on how to treat and support those with various mental health disorders. There's ongoing research all the time to continue to find better and better ways to support those people. We're really clear that those struggles are real for those people. And honestly, it kind of doesn't matter whether or not they have a chemical imbalance or whether or not they have a psychological problem that was brought on by circumstances that arose in their childhood that you could call baggage if you want to. The point is that they have the real experience, that they're struggling with something real that could have them the result that is currently resulting in harm to them. It could result in further harm to them or others, and that they are seeking support with that. So calling that not real is just, it's inappropriate, it's harmful, and it's not something I can be on board with, regardless of what the ideology might be.
And I think that's ultimately my main take home point too, is like, at the end of the day, like, it doesn't really matter what your moral tales are. It doesn't matter what your stories are. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. But if it's becoming harmful to people that are not part of your group, or if it's becoming harmful to people within your group, financially harmful, then I don't think that that's a very supportive system of faith. And I think that's where I really struggle with that. I think at the end of the day, like, I couldn't imagine going to a place where I'm seeking help and just being put in at more risk as a result of that, because I'm seeking out a community. I'm already vulnerable, and now I'm in more harm's way than I ever was, because they're trying to make money off of me, or they are telling me to isolate myself when isolation is the last thing I should do. And so I think that ultimately, no matter what your belief system is, if it's harmful, it's not helpful. And that's, we've got to move away from those things.
And all of this, that's basically just the creation of a person who was mad that he didn't get his way. So he created an entire religion to say, you can't be in my secret club and know the secret password unless you give me money and believe what I tell you to believe.
Yeah, I mean, L. Ron Hubbard was not a great guy. He stole Jack Parsons' wife and, like, did all kinds of really awful things while he was living with him. So, like, he's not a great guy.
Ooh.
He's not known for his, like, moral integrity.
All right. Well, I think that's about what we have to say about Scientology. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Shane, before we move on?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, I have a lot to say, but I don't think that it fits in the context of this particular episode.
Fair enough. Well, we do have some recommendations. I wouldn't recommend ads, but they're here anyway. Okay, we're back. I know we just had some transition music away from ads, so I'll give you a second to listen to my dulcet tones, the dulcet tones of my voice, and then we'll do a music to segue to our beautiful recommendations segment.
Recommendations.
I'm recommending a new stand-up special. It's by John Mulaney, and it's called Baby J. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch it yet. I don't know if you...
I have not.
Do you watch any stand-up at all?
Sometimes. Yeah, not super consistently, but I do sometimes.
Okay.
I've gotten a real joy out of some stand-up stuff, yeah.
Okay, good. So this one is starkly different than John Mulaney's stuff. So he still wears a suit and he's like very well dressed and all that. And it's still kind of like some exaggerated stories. But this is the whole, he tells, from the beginning to end, it's like him just kind of sharing and being vulnerable about his addiction and going to rehab and the whole process of like going to rehab, healing from rehab, all the struggles that he's had with being a drug addict, and like the entire story along that line. And it's really fascinating. It's really fascinating to watch him kind of be a different person and like tell different jokes instead of the really exaggerated stories. It's very linear and very, I think, very heartfelt. So I was really impressed with it, but it was also very funny.
Sure.
Because he was like, the whole time, like he was not like, he wasn't punching up or punching down at anybody else. It was always to himself. Like everything was like him just his own punching bag. And I thought that was really a great way to probably cope and stress or deal with the stress that goes along with recovery.
All right. Good to know.
Yeah.
Where do you get this? Where's this available?
It's on Netflix right now.
Okay. John Mulaney, Baby J on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
I'm recommending a TV show. I may have even recommended this before. I don't know, but I was just delighting in the wonders of this show, and that's Bob's Burgers. It's a cartoon show.
So good.
It's definitely available on Hulu. It might be available on Fox, but you can find it a couple different places. But this is just, it's such a delightful, wholesome, really, really funny, well-written show. And I think all the vocal talent in it is incredible. The story writing is wonderful. It's engaging. It never gets old. It's not relying on a lot of sort of shock value or politics. It's usually these sort of day-to-day struggle type comedy situations.
Yeah.
And some also goofball personalities that I think really help drive it forward. So Bob's Burgers, the movie was great too. Recommend that. So go out and find yourself some Bob's Burgers and just sit back and relax and enjoy the ride because it's a good time.
I love it. No, Bob's Burgers is great. It's so funny.
Indeed. All right. If you like what we're doing here today and you'd like to support us, you can do that by subscribing, leaving us a rating or review, picking up some merch, joining us on a trip through Scientology World theme park, which I don't think any of us would go to. So don't do that. I take it back.
No.
But specifically, if you join us on Patreon, we're trying to get to 15 patron supporters. And when we do, we'll do a virtual hangout with y'all, and you can sort of ask us questions. We'll just talk and hang out and have fun and do that sort of thing. If we get enough, then we'll do some more formal activities. We'll get to like 20. And again, if for our legal defense fund, we need like 2 million people. So join us over there. It's patreon.com/WWDWWD podcast. You can learn more about this episode and other episodes by going to our website. You can reach out to us by emailing us directly at info@wwd.wwdpodcast.com. For the people who have already joined us on Patreon, those people get all kinds of bonus stuff. They already like the episode. They get our notes. They get behind-the-scenes content. They get videos. They get ramblings from us. They get our search inquiries to ChatGPT. That special group of people consists of Mike M., Megan, Layla, Mike T., Justin, Kim, Joshua, the Daily BA, Brad, Stephanie, Kelly, Olivia, and Brian. Thank you all so much for your support. Credit where credit is due. Music and editing by Justin Greenhouse. Writing and fact-checking by Shane, Selena, Jess, and myself. And then, of course, thank you all for listening. Is there anything that I missed or anything you'd like to add before we close out this dive on Scientology?
Nope, not today.
Perfect. Then this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.